analyst. Peaceful Banana, good to have you on the program here tonight, focusing on the book of Hebrews. Give yourself, hey, it's good to have you, brother. Give yourself a real brief introduction, what your position is, and then what would you like to discuss?
I think I said before in the chat, I'm free grace, and same as Chris Morrison and Layman over here. I usually do sort of streams on Layman's channel, either reacting to stuff or making presentations. I probably wanted to do more teaching, but I hold to the same position as Chris, that the book is written to believers exclusively. I don't think it's written to unbelievers. Yeah, you can have theoretically unbelievers in the audience listening, I guess, but he's not writing to them. And so with that, I just take the warning passages as they are. I think that the backdrop of Hebrews is Kadesh Barnea in Numbers 13 and 15, where they rejected the spies. And so what you have is he's sort of encouraging them, because in the second generation of Israelites, they're going to take the land. They're going to go with Joshua. What did they need? They need faith in God. They need faith in God's promises, in his strength, in his ability. And so that's why he says Hebrews chapter 10:39. I don't think that's a warning to unbelievers. I think that's saying, look, we're not like those guys. We're not of those that draw back. We're not like those. We're not of those people that are already departing from the congregation in verse 25. So he wants them to stay. He wants them to get that reward inheritance that Jody Dillow talks about. I recommend his book. He wants them to actually persevere in their Christian faith so they can be partakers with Christ. So I would argue that way.
Would you say, but before you respond, Pastor Tommy, because I know some in the free grace world, they view inheritance, whereas I think I view inheritance and entering for the most part as being synonymous. Like I could see where some go with saying inheritance can mean rewards, could be the case. So would you, and then Chris, if you want to answer too, Peaceful Banana, based on what you're saying, would you see the promised land in that generation, if they would have believed in God's promise to see them through, defeat the giants, so on and so forth, would you have seen that akin to a reward and a blessing on top of their salvation?
I absolutely, because Moses committed the sin of the high hand. And what happened to him? He didn't enter the promised land. Now, he's still saved. We said that in Transfiguration, but he didn't get to have that temporal reward. Now, that's equated to the joint heirs with Christ, being a partner with him in the life to come. That's ruling with Christ, not just living with him. And so I would argue that he's warning these people. They're kind of like the second generation, because you have the first generation, the apostles, and then after that is the second generation he's writing to. And so that's the comparison there. And so I think, and my position on inheritance, I think every believer gets an inheritance, but how you obey God can decrease or increase that inheritance.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. And so would you apply that to the Christian's life today, that we're saved, but a blessing or reward if we walk in the Spirit and we have a heart of belief towards God's promises is rest experientially. In our Christian walk, we can have rest, peace of mind. Would you see that as analogous?
Yeah, I would agree.
So Hebrews 3, especially specifically Hebrews 3:12, you would see towards believers with an interpretation back then, but an application to believers today.
Yeah, I think actually God wants you in the book to rest. I think he wants you to rest from your works, continue to trust him with your daily life struggles. And I don't think it's all that complicated, but sin can get in the way of that. That's part of the evil conscience that you see in Hebrews 10. And so I would argue that all of that is also for believers.
Okay. Appreciate the clarifying points. Pastor Tommy, we'll throw it to you if you had any thoughts or anything you wanted to engage.
Well, so first off, I have to make sure I have to be done by 9:00. So if I have to cut out early, just so everybody knows, if they have any specific questions for me,
no problem.
But when it comes to the blessings, the promises, those are very general terms, and so obviously there's a certain level of inheritance and all that. We're depending on our performance as Christians, but at the same time, in Romans 9:3, it says, "For I could wish myself for a curse from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law and the service of God and the promises." And so, even people like Abraham, he never received the promises. They never, they saw them afar off. They will receive those things in the resurrection. And so, I do think in a general sense, without salvation, you get nothing. And so if these Jews, if they do not, embrace Christ and truly get saved, believe to the saving of the soul, they are going to get nothing. They're not going to receive the promises. I don't really think that that's about just like a lesser level of those things. So,
well, I would say, yeah. Well, when you're talking about a nation, yeah, Israel was adopted at a specific point in time, and as a nation, they got all of the things you just mentioned. But individuals who didn't believe, they had temporal stuff because of the Mosaic covenant. But they, obviously they don't have these things. And so when he's talking to individuals, like in Hebrews chapter 12, he sort of makes a comparison. And he says, lest there may in any of you a fornicator who, like Esau, when he was going to inherit the blessing, not salvation, just the blessing, he would have received the inheritance, but he gave it away and he traded it for a meal. So it's analogous in that way to a believer who lives carnally or doesn't persevere like they should, and they forfeit their inheritance. So they have it, but it can be lost.
Right. Well, and the thing is too, what you just brought up there, it kind of gives more credibility to just the fact that these warnings, they're being given a warning of something they're not going to be able to come back from, showing that there was something final coming. Because that's the thing about Esau. When he sold his birthright, there was no repentance found. Even though he sought it carefully with tears, God didn't allow him to get it back. And I believe that when he's writing to these, Hebrews, this is the other thing I don't know for sure. Was this written to a specific church of Hebrews, or was this something that was sent to the 12 tribes scattered abroad? Was it sent, to Jews all over the place? Was it sent to Jerusalem? I don't know that for sure, and I wish I did. That would help me because, again, I believe that those under the old, that were part of that old covenant, that were considered the people of God, God gave them 40 years to get on board with the new covenant. And I believe that those who waited until judgment came, it was over for them. And so, again, a lot of these things we're going into, it's just a lot of hypothetical stuff because we don't know 100% sure the exact audience, exact timing, and we definitely don't know for sure the results either. So it makes it a little difficult.
Yeah, I would I would agree in some sense. We don't actually, first of all, we don't know who wrote Hebrews, and we also, I would contend it's probably a second generation writer after the apostle. That's my theory, but either way, I would we don't know who wrote the book. We don't know if he was even a sermon given and it could have just been transcribed. We don't know if this was written to Jerusalem, a church in Jerusalem, because there were some churches there, or we don't know if it was written to a church outside of Jerusalem that was mainly Jewish. But I think just from the language of the text, like even just taking away just the title of the book, just the people of the text he's addressing, right? Like in Hebrews 2:11, he says, "For both he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified are all of one." So he's not ashamed to call them brethren. And in Hebrews 3:1, he calls them therefore holy brethren. Let us consider the high calling of our apostle. So he addresses his readers directly as an exhortation. And then he says, lest there be any of you brethren, an evil heart of unbelief and departing from the living God. So I mean, I think just taking that logical structure sort of shows us he's talking.
Actually, if I could add one thing, because I do appreciate those points.
Yeah.
Me reading through Hebrews 3, this definitely stuck out at me. Holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling. And I understand what Pastor Tommy is saying, which is a fair point too, that, okay, amongst the holy brethren, there could be unbelievers. But then I find various verses, like one here in Numbers, where even believers are called unbelievers. Like, and the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, because ye believed me not. Well, we know Moses and Aaron are believers, but if we have an evil heart of unbelief towards God's promises, in this case, it's analogous to that generation that were too scared to go into the promised land and fight the giants. A believer can also fail to walk in the Spirit and enter God's rest in this life from this vantage point, and they, as a result, could have an evil heart of unbelief. So I can see points on both sides of the equation, but so far I see more points, I think, on the side that says, no, these are believers, and they're being encouraged to not have that evil heart of unbelief. Pastor Tommy, we'll hand it to Pastor Tommy, see what he thinks about all that.
Yeah, no, again, I definitely think the audience is believers for sure. It's definitely professing Jewish believers. And so, but again, that I don't think that necessarily has to mean that 100% of them are saved, but I do think he's writing under the assumption that they are all saved, and what he is warning them from doing, it's a huge deal that I tend to doubt any of them actually did, but maybe they did. It's possible. But here's something else I want to throw at you guys, just to see, because this is just something I've heard before. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on this. As far as the audience, it says in Hebrews 12:23, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven. I've heard some say that indicates he was writing to the first church in Jerusalem. I don't know if anybody has any strong opinions on that.
So this actually, I would actually say this supports my personal opinion, nothing against, but so he talks about comparing Mount Sinai and the covenant with Mount Sinai versus the new covenant. And he says that, there was fear and trembling and trepidation and a loud trumpet that they couldn't approach. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn that are written in heaven, to God, the judge of all, and to spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than of Abel. I would say this, an unbeliever is not written in heaven. So I would never say that language to a professing unbeliever. I think that's too strong.
Yeah, I don't think this is speaking personally to a physical location of a church. This is contrasting. This is really important going back to chapter 8 and chapter 9. And even there in chapter 12, where Christ is ministering. He's ministering in heaven itself, in the heavenly temple. This is not a shadow. This is the main point in chapter 8 of Hebrews is the kind of priest Jesus is and where he's ministering. So he's saying, look at where you've come. You've not come to, for lack of a better word, church. You've come to the heavenly gathering itself. So as much as I would like to think that that's Jerusalem, because that fits my view, I think that that's more about the exalted status of.
Okay, let's move to the next guest or
of the new kingdom that's being established that cannot be shaken.
Yeah.